Support for this podcast and the following message comes from the Southern Environmental Law Center. SELC is one of the nation's most powerful defenders of the environment, rooted right here in the South, helping defend and protect our air, water, land, wildlife, and the people who live here. Learn more at southernenvironment.org.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on walking, keep on talking, marching on the freedom land. Keep on walking, keep on talking, keep on walking, keep on talking.
You're listening to Black Belt, a podcast where we amplify the voices of Black folks down South, working toward solutions to some of our region's biggest challenges, all with a dash of well-seasoned Southern fun. Hey y'all, and happy Juneteenth. This is episode 43 of Black Belt. Today you'll hear my conversation with Dr. Karama Neal, who is a longtime celebrator of the Juneteenth holiday. She calls it her favorite. Dr. Neal is the principal for Neal Firm, which provides consulting and mediation services. She has such an impressive resume, and she's such a great person to know. She's made a lasting impact on the world around her. Let's get to know her better.
So hi, I'm Karama Neal, and home for me is it's Little Rock, Arkansas, but I say home is where the heart is. And you know what that means for me is just being around family and being around the things that are familiar and being around the people and the places and the things that bring back wonderful memories of where I grew up, and that for me is Arkansas.
What does being Black and Southern mean to you?
It's such a great question. It's one I probably couldn't have answered as a child because I didn't have anything to put Southern in contrast to in some way. So after leaving the state, Southern made a lot of sense. And even once I lived in another part of the South, being an Arkansan made a lot of sense to me. And it's really about our culture. And there's a really specific culture around what it means to be Black and Southern and Black and from Arkansas. And it's one I celebrate.
If you could change one thing about the South, what would it be?
Yeah, I think I know what you're asking here, but probably the question I would say is I change the perception of the South. Mm-hmm. Like have it be a little bit more informed, a little bit more up to date, not so narrow, so that folks have a real honest and true perception of the South. Probably be better than what a lot of folks think.
I do like that rephrasing of this question, actually. I may consider that. If you could change one perception that people have about the South. Ooh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
So what makes you come alive? And the reason why I asked this question is because whenever I'm asked what my favorite quote is, I always say this quote from Howard Thurman that says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. So what makes you come alive?
That's a really great context for that question. It reminds me of not a painting, but just sort of a frame display of words that my mom we had in our house growing up. And it said, happy are those who dream dreams and are ready to pay the price to make them come true. Mm. And I think as I think about what makes you come alive, it's like seeing those things that I've dreamed come true. And I also really, really, really like helping other people make their dreams come true. Like if there's something I can do, be like, oh yeah, or like provide encouragement, or, if there's an introduction you can make or something you can be helpful on that helps somebody like get to what they've been working for, like that fills me too, fills my heart too.
I love that. That's a good quote. I'm gonna write that one down. Okay, so finally, this last question, we kind of switch it up depending on who we have. So yours is about sipping sweet tea on the front porch. If you could pick one person, dead or alive, to sip sweet tea on the front porch with, who would that be?
I can only have one. Okay,
you can
so
have
people always say
when tea party. You can have as many as you want.
Okay, that's good. People always say when you're interviewed, answer the question you wish they asked. The question
yeah,
asked you. So in that spirit, I think I've been feeling kind of nostalgic lately. My daughter's a junior in high school, and we're starting to think about college, and she'll likely go away. And so I guess, a little bit nostalgic. So I think I probably have tea with her, and then my late mother and my late grandmother. And my mother died when Ayoko was 3. My daughter was 3. So it'd be just really great for them for her to see her now, and my grandmother, who my daughter has shared, has a middle name that was my grandmother's first name. It just would be amazing if they could all be together.
Oh, yeah.
Those 4 generations.
That would be.
Alas, we'll do it in our
Yes.
minds.
Oh, that's great. As I mentioned at the top of the episode, today is Juneteenth. Hopefully you have the day off and you're enjoying a nice cookout and just having a good time with friends and family. What most people probably don't know is that June 15th is the day Arkansas became a state. Why would you know that? You wouldn't, but I'm making the connection because we're going to hear a lot about Arkansas today. Arkansas was once known as the land of opportunity, but that's because most people didn't know what was here. And the state, we stay under the radar. We're pretty low key until something bad or politically embarrassing makes national news. But Dr. Karama Neal wants people to see that Arkansas is really a great place to be. She's working to change people's perception of the state through advocacy and awareness, particularly Black folks. She wants people to think more seriously about choosing Arkansas.
I'm a native Arkansan. I grew up in Little Rock. Left after high school to go to Pennsylvania, went to sophomore college in Pennsylvania for college, came back and taught at the Arkansas School for Mathematics and Sciences. That's what it was called then. It was the very first year it was in operation. It was a wonderful time. I stayed there for a year. That was my plan before going to graduate school, and then went to grad school in Atlanta, lived in Atlanta for 14 years before moving back to Arkansas. And so that's sort of that background sort of, I think, sets the stage for some of the conversation we'll have today. In recent time, I've really been focused a lot on some of the heirs property work, which I talked with you all about previously. Also just recently completed my tenure with the USDA. I served as a presidential appointee for the Biden administration to lead the Rural Business Cooperative Service at Rural Development at the Department of Agriculture, and just left that early in 2024. And so I've been consulting and doing other work and taking on and sort of trying to live those dreams that I just talked about with my mom. Happy are those who dream dreams and ready to pay the price for make them come true. That's part of what I'm trying to do now. It's like some of these kinds of projects and ideas that you have that sort of linger and sit around for a little while, trying to actually take some time to make them come true.
Yes, and I think that makes us all better. Like what you said, that's what the world needs. People who are living out those dreams and doing that cool stuff. And so thanks for providing that background of like recent, but also like where you've been, because that's very important as we continue here. And so I mentioned you've been a guest before, and I forgot your daughter has too. So we've had 2 generations of your family on here. So but as part of that dreaming dreams and passion projects you have, there's something you've been working on for a long time. I mean, you've been stewing in your mind, so now it's about to happen. So tell us about this latest project.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. So we're calling it Choosing Arkansas, and excited to do this actually in collaboration with Black Belt Media. And so again, very excited about that. This really came about, it's been a long time coming. As I mentioned, I lived in Atlanta for 14 years, and particularly in my time there, really met a bunch of folks who were from Arkansas, who were living in Atlanta, doing various things, working, going to school, living their lives, those kinds of things. And, this was in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s. And I would have a Juneteenth party every year. This was before Juneteenth went mainstream, and most folks had not heard of Juneteenth. It was a big educational opportunity to talk about Juneteenth with folks. But I would have a big Juneteenth party every year in Piedmont Park, and folks would, lots of folks would come, and there were a few folks from Arkansas that I knew, had known maybe growing up or known from the state. And that was the one time I saw them. Like I'd see them every year at the Juneteenth party, and then just wouldn't cross necessarily the rest of the year, but I'd see them every year at Juneteenth. And oftentimes I would ask folks either at that party, or if there were other folks who I met who just, happened to be from Arkansas, we were chit-chatting, I'd ask them, you ever think about coming back home? And most of the time they would say, like, I don't know what I would do. Like, what would I do? And it wasn't that they had a negative reaction to Arkansas. They just didn't see the opportunity. And I think for me, one of the things that in my experience was very different. I only sort of recognized this fairly recently, and sort of the impact that it had on my life. Both my parents are both from Arkansas, different parts of the state. They both, great migrated up to Chicago, like so many of our folks do. And they met actually in Chicago. But they independently moved back to Arkansas. in the late 60s, early 70s. And that was not a time when Black folks were moving back to the South. Folks were still migrating out of Arkansas and places in the South at that time. So the fact that they had gone up, my mother lived in Chicago for 9 years. My dad lived out of the state for a long time. But then they came back and I was born here. And so, and they, like I said, they came back independently. So those are two separate decisions that they made. And so I'm very much a product of that. And so I think because of that, I always saw Arkansas as a place of opportunity. Our motto used to be a land of opportunity, right? And so the fact that my parents made that decision at a time in a way that frankly most folks weren't at that time, and chose this place, actively chose this place, I think sort of always was a part of me, always was part of the way that I thought about this place. Like, yeah, you can go away and you can also come back, and that's not a problem. And so when I heard, friends of mine and other folks I knew in Atlanta oftentimes saying like, oh, it just, it never occurred to me. Like, I don't know what I would do. Like, for me, that didn't ring true. I'd seen my parents make that decision. And I think maybe in part because I just always have been sort of Arkansas focused. When I was living in Atlanta for a long time, this was before everybody was working from home, but I worked from home for a long time in the very early 2000s. And I would listen to Little Rock radio online because you could stream online radio. And I would get Kenya Edding's newsletter called Today's Communique. It was talking about all the things going on in Central Arkansas. And so I knew what was happening. I could see what was happening. I could see about, the new public health school and all the kinds of things that were happening in a way that I wouldn't have if I hadn't sought it out. And so, I think that changed my sort of lens around what was possible in Arkansas. And so I wanted to see other people have that information so they could make an informed decision and not just sort of assume that the piece that they knew when they left is exactly the same piece and is the only kind of opportunity that's there. And then the other piece I'd say to that really sort of helped me think about this a lot is there used to be a fintech accelerator at the Venture Center in Little Rock, and folks would come from really around the world to help grow their fintech companies, their financial technology companies. And I was working for a financial institution at the time. We would go and meet with them. And I remember oftentimes at the beginning of the summer, it was like a 10-week program in the summertime, and they would oftentimes sort of have this look on their face like, I can't believe I have to live in Little Rock, Arkansas for the whole summer. Like they just, you could just see on their faces like, this was not my plan to come to Arkansas for the summer. And, we understand, we know what our reputation is. We know how folks often think of us. That was not particularly surprising, unfortunately. But what was very illustrative for me is that by the end of the summer, most people had changed their mind. They were like, this place is not so bad. I come back here to visit. This is a good place. And at least a couple people that I could name personally, and I think there may have been one or two more that I don't remember the names of, those companies moved their company to Arkansas after that 10-week period. They said, I've lived here for 10 weeks. I actually kind of like it. I'm going to bring my partner and my children, and we're going to see if we can make it home. And I know of at least 2 cases where that happened, where folks moved their companies and moved their families here because of that 10-week experience. And that told me, like, it's not just family that can bring you back or because it's home. It's a legitimately good place that people really want to live in if they have that experience, if they can sort of see it for what it is and recognize the value that we offer in Arkansas.
Yes, that's a great point, because so talk about, let's go back for a minute. When you ask your friends, do you ever plan to come back and things like that, what were your thoughts around coming back at that time? And then talk about what eventually brought you back and how you ended up back here.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think I won't say I always thought that would be a lie. When I first moved to Atlanta, I was just completely, I still am enamored of Atlanta. It's a great place. I was completely enamored of Atlanta when I first moved back, just seeing particularly Black folks doing any and everything and having more than one person to do it with, right? If you want to be Black vegetarian, you go to the Black Vegetarian Club. You can go to the Black Skiing Club. You can go to all stuff that I just, if I thought about it, I felt like I was the only one that ever thought about it. And the fact that there were, multiple people doing all kinds of different things really, really was just a wonderful experience. And I remember when I first got there, I was like, I'm going to live here the rest of my life. But then as time went by, and it didn't take too long, probably 2 or 3 years, I was like, this is a wonderful place, but I don't know if this is where I want to be forever. And there's something that's calling me back about home. And so I really, I planned to move back home, met my husband and become my husband and delayed that timing for coming back home. but we still had a plan. I remember before we got married, he just stopped me when we were doing yard work, and he stopped me one day and said, "Karama," he stopped me on the lawn and said, "Karama, I know we're going to live in Arkansas one day. It's okay."
Oh.
And I remember this huge flood of relief
wow.
came over me that I didn't even realize was there, like to have to come off. And so, that had been our plan for a long time. But, my mom ended up being diagnosed with dementia, and I'm her only child. And so our timeline got sped up a bit because I wanted to be home to be able to care for her. And so I was grateful to be able to do that. I'm grateful to my husband for being so flexible and loving and understanding to come back to Arkansas to make sure that I could care for my mom. And kind of in a way of thinking about, like, what Arkansas means. I remember when after she passed away in 2010, saying to my husband, like, if you want to go back to Atlanta, we can. Like, it's okay. And he said, I think we should stay. Mm-hmm. And so, something about that period, something about that time spoke to him about that as well. And so, we've made it home. And so that's been a real blessing, to be able to be in this place. It is provided opportunities in ways that I would not have ever imagined, and in ways that I really don't think would have been possible had I stayed in Atlanta. So it's been a good choice.
Yeah, and it's neat how you were about 2 or 3 years in, you kind of had that realization about that you knew you would one day, but you still continued to stay. But yeah, I like that.
You go to places for a reason or a season, or what is it? The life. I can't remember what that phrase is, yeah, but this Atlanta was a season for me, and it was a fantastic season, and I will always be grateful for the time and the friends and the folks I still have there. And so, but I'm also really, really pleased to be at home in Arkansas.
Yeah, and we are glad you're here.
Some places, big cities, you kind of hear about what's going on in those places when you're outside of the city, right? You may know what's happening in New York or what's happening in Atlanta, even though you live in Memphis or wherever, because, it makes the news. It's a big place. There's big stuff going on, and it makes the news outside of the state. That's not really the case in a place like Arkansas. You're not going to hear about the kinds of activities, the new dental school that's coming, the new vet school that's coming, you're not going to hear the new DO school that might have opened, the new public health. You're not going to hear about those things outside of Arkansas in most cases, unless you're just like in that particular space. And so what that meant for me, and I think that's again why it was so helpful that had already been, when I was living in Atlanta, was already listening to Arkansas radio and listening, understanding what was happening, because I had a sense of that. But I think many of the people I talked to didn't have that sense. They didn't know what was happening. They remembered what it was like when they left, and maybe they left in high school, or maybe they left after college, or whenever they left. They knew what it was like then. They knew what it was like in the place the physical place where they lived. And, our memories can be a little stagnant like that, right? You remember what we saw, and we don't necessarily assume that things have changed, even though we've changed and we've grown and we've moved. We assume those old memories are still the way things are. And they're not, right? I mean, we know that intellectually, but sometimes we have to be reminded of it in the present. And I think my hope is that the Choosing Arkansas series will help do that. Will hopefully highlight people who have made a choice about living in this place, and ideally loving this place and thriving in this place. Show other people, what that looked like. Not to suggest that any place is perfect. I'm not suggesting Arkansas is perfect, but to show really what that decision looked like. What has been pleasantly surprising. Maybe some of the challenges as well. But how they made that decision, why they made that decision, really in the hopes of encouraging others to make a similar kind of decision, to maybe rethink what life here might look like, and think, what? Yeah, I thought I couldn't go back to home, but I didn't realize all this stuff was happening. Charles Blow has a recent book called The Devil You Know, where he talks about really this idea of having Black folks make a reverse Great Migration. All the Great Migration folks that we talked about, folks like my parents and lots of my relatives and others who moved away, he encourages them in this book to move back to the South. And he talks about 5 states in particular they should move back to. Arkansas is not one of them, so I got a little bone to pick with him about that. But I think he makes a good case, and I think he makes it really in 2 big ways. One, he talks about the pull, which is like, really the way I think about it is taking off, removing the stereotypes and the old sort of stories about what the South is, and looking at it with fresh eyes, with clear vision, and really thinking about, what, is this a place I could be? The weather's good, the economy's, good, the cost of living is good. Like, there's cultural institutions that align with the kinds of things I like. maybe this is a place I could be.
Yeah.
So really taking a clear look at the place. And then he also talks about the push. And I don't really emphasize this as much, but I think he makes a really valid point when you look at some of the data and some of the places in what he calls destination cities, these places where Black folks migrated during the Great Migration, that many of the kinds of things that are challenges for Black folks are frankly more common in destination cities. So if you look at, for example, the Black male incarceration rate is higher in many of those northern cities and western cities than it is in the South. Now, there may be more Black people in some of these southern states, but the rate of incarceration is higher. If you look at the places where police involved shootings are, again, not exclusively, but many times, most of the time, they're in some of these destination cities as opposed to in the South. And so some of the kinds of things that we associate negatively, we sort of assume that are in the South, but they may not be. And I think, our parents, our grandparents, our relatives oftentimes had a real good reason for migrating out of the South, but that reason may not exist now, right? We're a long time out from that period of time. And so it's time to take a fresh look, take the blinders off and take a fresh, clear look at this place and make an informed decision about whether or not it's someplace you want to be. So the goal is to highlight folks who have done that, who've made that decision for whatever reasons, and really with the goal of encouraging other people to think about what that move might look like.
What are the archetypes of the people you want to talk to? Like, it wouldn't be me, who's a lifelong Arkansan who never left. I mean, even though I'm choosing to stay, but you have a different type of person you want to talk to. So tell us about who.
Yeah, so let me just start with where you said. I think there's a lot of value in the folks who choose to stay, because that is not to suggest that there is not significant value in that making that choice, because a lot of people don't choose to stay, right? So the fact that you and so many other people I could name chose to stay and chose to do that is incredible and is to be commended as well. You are right. For this series, we're thinking about folks who might be able to come back for any number of reasons to help build our economy, to help increase the diversity and the cultural aspects and all the kinds of things that make life really exciting and make this place a great place to live. I think it'll make it continue to make it an even better place to live. So we're looking at folks who, maybe like me, settled someplace else. We're pretty settled in, but then for whatever reason decided to move back to Arkansas or move to Arkansas. We're looking at folks who maybe were from Arkansas, but went to school in the big city, and so maybe went to school someplace where folks assumed they would absolutely stay because, man, how could you leave DC, or how could you leave Atlanta, or how could you leave that place? But for whatever reason, decided to come back. So what did that look like? They weren't quite as settled in as somebody like maybe me was when I left. We're looking at folks who are the spouse of people who are from Arkansas. And so, they kind of, for lack of a better phrase, sort of got drug along, but maybe have been able to make a home and thrive here themselves, and own it for themselves. And we'd love to talk with folks like that. We'd like to talk with folks who, as I mentioned when I talked about the Venture Center and their FinTech Accelerator, for whom just life happens. Maybe Arkansas wasn't on their radar at all. They weren't even thinking about this. It just wasn't even something they were thinking, a place they were thinking about. But life happened. They got this opportunity. They went to schools here. They met somebody. Like, something happened. Life happened, and they ended up here. And you know what? It's actually pretty good. I kind of like this place, and I want to stay. And then finally, we're looking at people who have family roots here. So these are folks who maybe did not grow up here. Maybe have never lived here before, but maybe they spent summers here as a kid with their grandparents, or maybe they, this is where family reunions were held because their family roots are here. And then at some point they decide, you know what, we're going to move here. we're going to make this our home again. This is where our people were from. And even though I didn't grow up here, I grew up maybe in a destination city somewhere, as Charles Blow would say, I'm going to come back and make Arkansas home. So those are some of the categories we're looking at. Of course, we're thoughtful, of course, broadly to think about who might want to be able to tell their story, and again, encourage other people to make Arkansas home too.
I'm really excited to hear these stories because, as someone who didn't move, like, I feel like the moving bug bit me late, like kind of in my 30s, and even me hearing them talk is kind of like reassuring that, okay, then there's a lot happening here, because sometimes you don't see it because you're too close to it. You may not see all the opportunities you have. So
I think that's right. And I think for a lot of folks, certainly for myself, like, A, you don't see those opportunities, and B, it's hard to, at least for me, it was hard to see what was really so special and so good and so valuable here without having a foil, without having something to compare and
Mm-hmm.
contrast it to. And I think for me, that's part of what my time away allowed me to do, is to sort of see like, oh, there's value. There's really, it's something pretty cool to be, a fifth, sixth, seventh generation Arkansan. Like, and you've been in this place and you know what this place looks like. It's, when I think about the Ayers property and, it's pretty special to be able to go to the place where my mother was born, my grandmother was born, and my great grandmother was born on that piece of property. Like that's pretty special. And a lot of folks don't have that, and that's fine. But I appreciate that I do have it. And many of us in this place do have that. And, those kinds of things, I think oftentimes we take for granted. It's easy to take for granted until you see something else. And I know for me, that was really an important factor.
Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after a word from our sponsors to hear more from Dr. Karama Neal. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from the Southern Environmental Law Center, one of the nation's most powerful environmental defenders, rooted right here in the South. As lawyers, policy and issue experts, and community advocates and partners, SELC takes on the toughest environmental challenges. That's why they say, solutions start in the South. To learn more about how SELC makes a difference, visit southernenvironment.org. Okay, we are back with Dr. Karama Neal talking about her project that she's going to launch on this podcast. We're very honored, called Choosing Arkansas. And so, Karama, we were talking about, Charles Blow picking those 5 states. Can you tell us a little bit about what states he picked and kind of why he did, and then make the case for why you think he should have included Arkansas on that list?
I'm always going to advocate for Arkansas. He looked at the data, and I think he made a good case. And I can understand why he picked the 5 states he did: Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina. Those are states that have already the highest percentage of Black populations in the country. So there's a foundation already to build on. There's a significant Black population. We don't have as high a Black population in Arkansas. I think we're like 13-14%, something like that. Pretty close around there, somewhere like that. And that's lower than, frankly, our neighbors like Louisiana or Mississippi or those other 3 states as well. But I think, there's value to think about what that looks, what it looks like to have people in these places, frankly, to have economic and political and other kinds of power a little bit more concentrated. The example that he gave in his book, which I did not know about, but I've heard other people talk about now that I'm like sort of thinking about it and talking about it a little bit more, is Vermont, and how, some people made some very clear decisions. Some progressive folks made some very clear decisions about moving to Vermont. It was a small state, and they could basically take it over. And that's what they did. And so, you can see the political differences in Vermont in part because of that. And so, I think there's a lot of value to, and I don't think his argument is perfect, but I think there's a lot of value to a lot of the argument that he makes in that book. Part of the ways I think about Arkansas, in particular, though, as a place to move back to, and one, we have an increasing population. Our population is increasing. That's not the case for 2 of the states that are the 5 that he has on his radar. And I think, when you have an increasing population, that says something about the economy of the state. It says something about the quality of life. It says more people are moving there than are leaving there, by whatever means. And so, to have a state that is contiguous with 2 of the other states that he's talking about, so you're creating sort of an area of impact and influence, that it does have an increasing population. I think that's something to be thoughtful about. We have what I like to think of as a small state advantage, again, which is different from some of the other states that he talks about. I think a lot about, some of the kinds of things that are really beneficial to being in a small state. It's easy to know people. It's easier to connect with folks because, sometimes there really is just 2 degrees of separation between people, and you can find who you need to find. And sometimes, if you find you're trying to get something done, you can get to the people you need to get to. You can also, frankly, make meaningful connections with people who may be very different from you, but because you went to the same place, or you had a relative who used to work for this place that they, whatever. There's so many connections, and I think that is I find a lot of benefit and value in that, is being able to sort of find somebody who maybe on the surface you think this person not going to have anything in common, but it turns out we do, and we can talk for hours about whatever it is,
Yes.
you know. And that I think is really valuable. As again, as we think about how to build communities, we think about how to get things done and those kinds of things. So I think there are a number of these kinds of small state advantages, how ideas diffuse quickly, how change is easier when you're thinking about percent change because you have a smaller population. Just a number of those kinds of things. And the other thing I would say that I think is a really, really an attribute of Arkansas is our varied geographies, and frankly, within, sort of our varied cultures, right? My favorite example of that, Juneteenth is my favorite holiday. I'm on the record as saying that. And part of what I like about it is how specific it is. My grandmother on my mother's side, my maternal grandmother, was from Southwest Arkansas. She grew up celebrating Juneteenth as a little girl.
Wow.
Like, she talked to me about the exact things that she did and what kinds of, that's my parties in Atlanta were modeled off of what she said that they did. She said the women would make a picnic lunch, or have dinner on the grounds. The men would play football and singing. Men would play baseball and singing groups would come by. So
sounds like a time.
We didn't play base. It was a ball. It sounds like a ball. We didn't play baseball. We had played volleyball, and we didn't have singing groups came by, but we had plenty of music in Piedmont Park, and then everybody bought food, and so we had food in the park. So it was modeled after what she did growing up in Arkansas. On my dad's side, my dad's family is from East Arkansas, and they would not have even known what Juneteenth was.
Yeah.
It's just, and so when we think about the varied cultures, the varied geographies, the varied kinds of economies in our state, we think about, the southern part of our state and with timber, and the eastern part with a lot of row crop ag, and, northern part of our state. It's just there's a lot of diversity. So I would say in a lot of ways, there's something for everyone, So I think there's reason to really think intentionally about Arkansas, even in the context of Charles Blow's proposed great remigration.
I'm so excited about Arkansas, and I purposely wore this Arkansas Love shirt. It's specifically
lovely.
It's specific to the 501 Central Arkansas, but I wanted to wear it today because we both love Arkansas. We're from here. But as we know, as Black Southerners and as Black Arkansans specifically, we can have a kind of complicated relationship with the place we call home. So that being said, like, what do you say to those people who are inevitably going to listen and be like, why would I go there? Their politics are wacky, or, my folk don't feel safe here because this group they're a part of. So like, how do we respond to those people who think either the real stuff that's happening or even like the made up stuff from the past that's keeping them from wanting to come here?
Yeah, I think, it's a legitimate question, right? I'm not suggesting that Arkansas is perfect. It is a great place to be. I'm pleased to be here. No place is perfect though, right? And so that's definitely the case. I do think it's important for everybody. You alluded to this in your question. I think it's important for everybody to have informed thoughts around these things. Or if you're not going to be informed, at least be neutral, right? So, and 3 ways I think about this is, one, if you really just don't know, and so you're just basing things on stereotypes or out of, just weird kinds of information, that's probably not a good way to make a decision, right? Or to rule someplace out. 2, if your information, it was informed, but maybe it's out of date, I think about a friend of mine. I had some pictures on Facebook or something of a festival. It's a cornbread festival that happens in Little Rock. And I had some pictures of Cornbread Festival, and she's lived out of state, really ever since high school. And she said, "Oh, I didn't know about this." And I thought to myself, you haven't been here in 20 years.
Right.
That's what you don't know. Like, and it's not a problem. It's not bad, but things have changed. Like, there's different stuff that's happening now. Right. So sometimes our thoughts can be out of date. And, if that's what we're leaning to, it may not be the correct, I won't even say the best, but it may not be the correct impression to have because it's out of date. And the other way I think about this too is if our impression is narrow, and by that I really mean I'm thinking sort of geographically narrow. So you've had one person has had a set of experiences in one part of the state, and they assume that that's what the whole rest of the state is like, and that may not be the case, right? It may be that I don't want to move to this part of the state, or, but maybe I can move to Northwest Arkansas, or maybe I can move to Central Arkansas, or maybe I can move to Jonesboro, or maybe I can move to Hot Springs, Or maybe, you know what, I don't want those big cities, but I could build a farm, and I could be in rural Arkansas, and I could work online. I could do all the things I need to do because I'm working in rural Arkansas and living there, and I can actually have land that I can afford and farm or do whatever I want to with it. So I think really thinking broadly, again, that's why I emphasize the varied geographies, sort of varied cultures, is probably something for a lot of people in our state. And sort of thinking about, what the impression is we have of this place, and where it might be bolstered with more appropriate, more up to date, more relevant information. And honestly, I think that's what we would do with any place that we were seriously considering, right? If we were considering moving to any place, that's exactly what we would do. Sometimes we don't give the South that same benefit of the doubt, and that I would say is unfortunate.
We're not in the news a lot. Like people don't, they can't. We don't have like an LA Times or New York Times or Washington Post. Like we have our local media outlets. But
Right.
Unfortunately, when we do make national news, it's always, kind of negative. It's probably about some policy that passed or something like that. So yes, we can't judge an entire state just based on those headlines.
Right, right. And I think that's the key. And I think, recognizing, we think about politics, for example, our elected representatives do not represent everybody in Arkansas. And there's an active group of folks who are resisting, and who are providing alternatives for folks who are not currently represented by the folks who are in power. And so, but that's not necessarily something that would make the news. And so I think it's important to know, again, this is a place, again, because of some of the small state advantage, those kinds of things, it's a place where you really can make a difference, and get involved and get engaged in a really meaningful way that makes a significant impact.
Okay, so besides moving to Arkansas, what else do you hope listeners and viewers take away from the Choosing Arkansas series?
Yeah, it's a really great question because, ambitious as it sounds, and as much of an advocate as I am, like, I recognize everybody's not going to move to Arkansas, so that's okay. What I do hope people do, and we alluded to this in the last question, is just learn about the state, right? Take an honest look at it, just like you would, many other places. Take a look at it and see, like, what is there? What could I do? What does work life looks like there? What does social life look like there? What are the educational opportunities there? Like, whatever those questions are, take a really honest look at it. So I hope people would learn, which would facilitate an open mind and that kind of thing. As they learn, I would hope people would be an ambassador, and help, sort of spread the word. And, I think about just recently we had the eclipse, the total eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
We were in totality in many parts of the state. And I was really so honored that I had 10 friends come in from 5 states and 1 foreign country, to visit for the eclipse. And, I'm pretty sure none of those folks are going to move to Arkansas, from all the places that they're pretty rooted in other places. But, I think they had a really good time. I tried to show them a good time and tried to make sure that they saw this wonderful place for what it is. And my hope is, and frankly, my expectation is that there'll be a bit of an ambassador for the state.
Mm-hmm.
If somebody sort of, says, oh, these people, we should just let them secede, forget about them, there's nothing there, that they would speak up and say, what, actually, that's not the case. Like, I went there and I met some folks and I talked with some people. And, and so I think if we can think about how, folks can be an ambassador, because you have learned and you have kept an open mind, you saw it, you know what's happening sort of broadly across the state, and know what kinds of things what kinds of opportunities are here, that you can use that to be an ambassador. And then the third thing I would say, if you're not going to move, is to engage in this place, right? I mean, we live in a world now where you don't have to sort of have all of your activity engagement happen within, a 10-mile radius of where you live or something like that, right? People work online and they socialize online and they engage, and they, we have airplanes and interstate highways, all kinds
Even
of
here,
ways for folks to engage. Exactly. And so my hope is that people would think about, how they can engage. I'm thoughtful about people I know who, maybe they've lived away, but they have a scholarship that they provide for students who graduate from the high school that they went to. Are they, they set up a foundation to help, fund work and do, exciting kinds of things in the state. Are they helping manage their property because they live someplace else, but they have some property that they own and they're managing it or creating jobs or building. Like, there are other ways to engage as well. And so we would hope that people would think, again, intentionally about what that opportunity looks like here, and how they can build on that, even if they decide not to move.
Those are great tips for anybody about any place. Like, and what's cool about Arkansas is that we're not a huge state like, California or New York. So like a lot of people may not even know anyone from Arkansas. So like once they do, they can become an ambassador because they're like, well, I know so-and-so and they're not like that, so the few of us who are here, the 3 million of us who are here, there's not that many of us. So like the people who are privileged enough to know us can use us to like change perceptions about Arkansas. So how can people connect with you? We're going to have a few episodes on our podcast, but like beyond that, how can people connect with you about this?
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think we're very much interested in sharing these kinds of stories. Not only to highlight as you said, the wonderful people who are already here, but also really to encourage, primarily really to encourage other people to think clearly and think optimistically and think positively about this state, potentially in ways that encourage them to get more engaged in this place. And so very much encourage people to reach out to us. We have an email address, choosing AR. AR, of course, is for Arkansas. I'll just set a pause here. Like AK is Alaska and AZ is Arizona. So if there's anybody who's confused about that, like let's just be really clear. AR is Arkansas, AK is Alaska, AZ is Arizona. So choosing AR, choosing Arkansas, choosing AR at gmail.com. Encourage people to reach out if you have feedback or things you'd like to see, and we're excited to sort of move forward. If you want to sponsor or want to think about how to engage with us on this, I'm really pleased to be doing this with you all at Black Belt Media, just given the platform that you've built and how you've been so intentional about creating a space for the voices of Black folks from down south, and that of course really resonates with me as one of those Black folks from down south. And I, excited about the idea to partner with you all on doing the Choosing Arkansas series.
Yes, and we're so excited to partner with you too. And thank you for educating the people about the postal abbreviations, because I see reputable organizations and companies get that wrong so much. Like Little Rock AK, it's like just Google it, like assuming they know. And what'd you say earlier? No, well, this is not the same thing. But I like that line you said earlier. Don't if you're not informed, be neutral. That doesn't go for this, but like look it up. Just check yourself.
Yep. No, Little Rock, Arizona. Yep. Phoenix, Arkansas. Yes. Exactly. Let's see that all the
time. Yep. So is there anything that you want to add that I didn't think to ask before we let you go today?
I don't know. I'll just say, again, very much grateful for the opportunity to share about this and talk about this in the context of y'all's podcast. I think, there really are a lot of opportunities. And you said it earlier, right? A lot of the kinds of things we're saying we can say about any place, but I think we don't necessarily say them about all those places, yes. Right? We say those kinds of things about some of these bigger places, some of the better known places in our country and in our world. People take that for granted that, oh yeah, there's going to be stuff there. I just need to go and read about it and learn about it. I'm going to go take a trip here and I'm sure there's going to be stuff there. I'm just going to find out it's going to be there. But sometimes we don't ask those same kinds of questions for this place. And I think there's really inherent value in treating us the same way you treat some of these other kinds of places. And so we hope folks will do that. We think we have a great place here to live and to visit and to work and to play and to thrive. And we hope more people will.
I can't believe I never mentioned this earlier, but when I did have my moving bug, I joined a group called Flip the Zip. And it's for Black people who want to move somewhere. And it's just like groups about like different places. And they have groups specific to those larger cities, but within the main group, you have people say things like, every once in a while I'll search Arkansas and see what they're saying. And like, there's a few people like, what about these lesser known states? Like they'll mention those. And you have people who are really advocates for them. And you have some people who will trash a place that they've never even been to. So sometimes there's one lady in there. She is like known as a person who really loves Arkansas because she lived Northwest Arkansas. And she has since moved, but like she became like the ambassador for that region. And like when people think of that area, they think of her. So she has really changed some minds just with the things she would post about it.
Yep.
But of course, people think about like the popular cities, like, of course, the Raleigh is the place that I always thought would be cool to live, and Charlotte and Atlanta and Dallas. And, so it's always neat to see the smaller places getting some love. But then you do see a lot of stuff that's kind of annoying, but,
it happens to the best of us. We're just trying to level the playing field a little bit, right? I mean, every place is going to have some negative attributes. No place is perfect, but let's make sure that the things that are positive at least get the light of day, right? And so you can make an informed decision about whether or not that's someplace you want to visit or invest or move or, engage with.
We're so grateful to have Karama Neal as our guest today. And on our next episode, you can catch her as a guest host. She'll be joined by Samantha Evans, another native Arkansan who found her way back home.
And Karama, when I drove across that Memphis Bridge and saw the Arkansas State sign, I cried. I had this sort of set of home that that everything was going to be okay.
We can't wait for you to hear Sam's story. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts so others can find us. You can also listen to the Black Belt Podcast on most streaming platforms, including Spotify and Amazon Music. This episode was produced and edited by Katrina Dupins and Prentice Dupins Jr., with theme music composed by Prentice Dupins Jr. I'm Adina White, executive producer and founder. Black Belt is a production of Black Belt Media. Connect with us on social media and at blackbeltvoices.com.